Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Trinity Talks. Today, we'll be doing a year in review for the year 2020, and quite a year it has been. Joined today by Trinity Senior Partner Paul Biggs and by the head of our Paris office partner, Pierre Bernheim. And I will be moderating and guiding everyone through today. My name's Kaushik Ray. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, really, there's been such an awful lot that has happened this year. We're going to talk about COVID-19, of course, and the economic and social impact that has had. We'll be touching a little bit on global politics and what that means for infrastructure and foreign direct investment into emerging markets, in particular into the African continent. We'll be touching on a few specific examples of what's going on in a number of Anglophone countries and a number of Francophone countries, and trying to kind of glean a few trends that are going on in the infrastructure and power space. And finally, we'll look forward to 2021 and see what that holds. So, in terms of general themes and an introduction to 2020, well, we've all managed to survive so far, which is a good thing. But clearly, the economic and social impact on COVID-19 has been absolutely devastating for almost every, or certainly for every country across the planet. Studies estimate that the impact in economic terms of COVID will be a fall of around about 1.4% GDP, but with smaller African economies facing contractions of up to 8%. And this is the first time in 25 years that there has been any kind of contraction in GDP forecast for the entire continent. That contraction is mainly as a result of export adjustments, affecting primarily commodity exporters. But also the impact of that is the attendant losses to tax revenues, which really mean that countries have less money to spend on public services. The slide on the right from the World Bank Group is relatively depressing reading. If you're looking even at the baseline forecast for COVID, it's an extra 35 million people pushed into poverty over the course of the 18 months from 2019 onwards. Directly really as a result of COVID-19. We will have a few more positive things to talk about, but one of the biggest impacts, and for those of you who know me, one of my favorite topics is debt service sustainability, and the World Bank's sort of chart there for sub-Saharan African debt service. It really shows the size of sovereign debt and foreign debt that's owed by a number of African countries. And the pandemic itself is pushing debt to really, the highest levels, because there are spending needs, there are health spending needs for countries, and revenues are falling. In April, May of this year, the IMF started to put together this thing called the DSSI, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, effectively an initiative that meant that bilateral official creditors would, during a limited period of time, suspend their debt service payments from the poorest countries, and that's 73 lower and lower middle income countries that requested that suspension. And the idea was that it would ease some of the financial constraints for those countries and for them to free up scarce money to mitigate the human social impact of the crisis. That suspension is likely to last well into 2021, scheduled currently to last until June, but I imagine it will go on. What's the impact? What does it mean for foreign investors? Well, what it means is that sovereign debt issuances themselves for those countries that have taken part are likely to be off. There's almost certainly going to be a lot of sovereign debt restructuring in the next couple of years. But really for the infrastructure and the energy space, what it means is those guarantees that governments very often offer or used to be able to offer, they're going to be increasingly more difficult. There's going to be less and less ability for governments to put things on their balance sheet without sign off and without approval from the IMF, unless effectively it's part of the policy for the country. Infrastructure clearly is one of the primary growth factors in terms of economic growth. So potentially guarantees for infrastructure will be allowed, but it's certainly one to watch. Turning to the US and the UK and the EU, where a lot of foreign investment into the African continent comes. In the UK, we still have no Brexit deal, so a lot of uncertainty for people doing business in and out of the UK, although a number of trade agreements, for example, with Kenya have been rolled over. There's a big push with the current government for global Britain, so for new trade deals, increasingly focused on traditional Commonwealth partners, of which a lot of Anglophone Africa is a member. The Department of International Development was merged earlier this year with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to create a new department to link development to other political goals. And there's subsequently been a reduction in the amount that's available as part of that budget for the first time in 20 or so years. The impact of that will be seen in the coming years. Just one other note on the UK: investors into the UK should be aware of the new National Security and Investment Bill, which creates for the very first time a foreign investment regime in the UK itself, which strengthens the UK's ability to intervene in transactions in certain key sectors like data, telecoms, energy, to protect UK national security. And again, currently it's only a bill, so a bit of watch this space. Sticking to that theme of watch this space, Joe Biden is indeed the president-elect, despite what some people may say. Certainly has a very strong moral commitment to support the African continent, but the likelihood is that his focus will be on domestic matters, particularly in relation to job creation and solving the economic impact of COVID and the income and wealth disparities in the US. What impact his policies will have on US government agencies like DFC or like USXN, again, really to be seen and at present relatively unknown. So with that kind of quick canter through some of the kind of wider, more global aspects, I'll turn over to Paul Biggs to talk about some Anglophone countries and some other general trends.
Thanks very much, Kosh, and yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, clearly, what a year it's been. I think this time last year, when all of us were at our desks, surrounded by other humans, which is something almost of a treat these days to be engaging with other human beings personally. I don't think any of us would have expected to consider that we'd have had the challenges that we've had during the course of 2020. Certainly the idea of being so quick and getting to your mute button on your computer when you're having Zoom calls like this, and you're having the great array of background noises of dogs, children, whatever it may be. I don't think that was ever expected by any of us. I think getting involved in kind of detailed examination of the lovely force majeure clauses due to global pandemics was anything that would have envisaged either, but it's certainly been a big topic of conversation and our work during the course of the last few months. I don't think we ever expected that we would almost miss discussions on Brexit, including with the likes of Koch there. So, but sadly, with the domination of news with global pandemics, we have almost missed our little friend Brexit. But so I think if it wasn't enough for global pandemics to create a challenge, we've also had some significant challenges as well in Anglophone markets, particularly in the context of Africa as well, to contend with. And I'll try and say a little bit of positive news about those challenges as well, because I think those of us who particularly have worked and continue to work in Africa for a long time, we always have to look to the positive to continue to attempt to move forward with initiatives and deals in the continent. I think in terms of just general trends, it has remained renewable deals. I think we've continued to work on various major thermal IPPs, but more in the context of restructuring them or buying and selling of them rather than particular large new thermal IPPs. but significant amount of renewables, in particular solar. We ourselves are involved in floating solar, one of the world's first in Seychelles. But general philosophy of moving to green investments continues to be the theme. In terms of some of the countries where there's been a lot of activity, again, many of you are aware, Ghana's been going through some challenging times during the course of this year. Actually this year and late last year. But far from the initial announcement by the government of Ghana that actually take or pay contracts were wrong, evil, and weren't going to be respected, we've moved on significantly from that. And I think kind of that's a good news story in a way, that despite initial political pronouncements, we have seen a significant demonstration that government of Ghana and all of the stakeholders in Ghana want to find solutions in terms of the struggles that the power sector has been in and continues to be in. And we do hope and almost believe now that we will be seeing an end to that restructuring process during the course of next year. We ourselves are significantly involved in that process. So hope for Ghana, and I think that may in itself, in terms of the scene post that restructuring, hopefully allow maybe even other projects to happen. One of the things Ghana, for example, is significantly missing is actually renewable power. There hasn't been many renewable power projects undertaken in Ghana, but I think with a restructured sector, there is the ability for perhaps those to be undertaken. We've been busy in Ethiopia. Again, some maybe on the call are aware we're fast pursuing the getting to effectiveness of 2 large geothermal power projects we've been acting on for some time. And again, Ethiopia remains of huge potential, both for those projects, but also potentially many others. Ethiopia, I think, is one of the few countries which hasn't had a large amount of IPP activity at all, to be honest with you, until these geothermal. The political uncertainty, of course, has not been helped by the outbreak of unrest in Tigray. That does seem to have calmed down with the actions of the host government. Without question, that still needs to be dealt with. There is a huge amount of displaced people in Sudan, a huge amount of potential uncertainty in the country as a whole, and making sure that those displaced people are looked after, and the poverty issues associated with that also need to be considered. But in terms of Ethiopia and just the Horn of Africa generally, it is clearly of massive strategic importance, both for Africa as a whole, but also other big, the West in terms of US involvement and otherwise. So it's going to be very interesting to, I think, see what happens in the context of Ethiopia during the course of the next year. Zambia, like Ghana, also big challenges in terms of the sector, and there's no getting away from it. We've been involved in other Zoom calls like this, and where we've specifically discussed Zambia, and I think the many involved in those calls were really concerned about the way in which the power sector in particular, but the country as a whole is progressing. Some good news too, though. We do believe that the government and various other donors are looking at initiatives as to the way in which both the power sector, but also perhaps the various parts of the economy as a whole can be restructured, and hopefully Trinity itself may be involved in some of those initiatives to find a different way perhaps of doing things. Which comes on to the next kind of theme, really. I think one of the things which we're seeing more and more is a real, actually, imagination, which is good in terms of developers and lenders looking at different models for these sort of projects to get done. Trinity acted on the financing of the Gensa platform in Ghana, which lenders lent to in substantial amounts of money. And again, that's a very large, effective, captive, large company supporting the mining industry in Ghana. But there's other smaller players in terms of off-grid, solar, on rooftop sort of platforms or industrial rooftop platforms, slightly larger. And all of those are, again, looking at developing, expanding quickly, but with that expansion now capable of being supported by perhaps debt lenders who are, again, looking at ways of financing these projects, not in a typical project finance type of structure, but with more of a corporate or quasi-corporate / project finance lending. So not looking necessarily to the cash flow of one particular large customer, but a portfolio approach of lending, which will allow those companies to really grow. And I think that is going to be a real flavor moving forward. Yes, capacity payments, we've seen resistance from governments. The first was Ghana, like I mentioned earlier, who decided that take or pay PPAs were wrong. And again, one theme we certainly continue to see is that utilities in Africa, they do speak to each other quite a lot more now. And I think we found it that other governments and ministries across the continent were aware as to what Ghana was saying. And it didn't take a lot for them to also then start to suggest the same concerns. So I think one of the things from the private sector side, we all need to do a lot better is educate governments, off-takers, donors, stakeholders in understanding some of these key principles, in that take or pay contracts aren't in themselves wrong or evil. Sometimes it's the deals you give those to, which may not be the right projects to get the benefit of those take or pay contracts. So understanding why those contracts are in the form they are, understanding what the risks are, I don't think any of us can ever diminish the need for education, engagement between public and private sectors to achieve sustainable deals in this way. I think the other just final point in terms of progress is other stuff apart from power. We've closed a number of port deals in Ghana this year. We continue to be active in terms of equity investments in healthcare, in terms of toothpaste manufacturers, in terms of cocoa. All sorts of other activities still continue to be undertaken. And I think the other large sector, again, not surprisingly in the context of global pandemics, which is going to be very relevant in the context of Africa and other emerging markets, is healthcare. And again, we've got a number of activities going on in relation to the healthcare sector. And I think the one, again, big key requirement in terms of Africa and other emerging markets is all of us in the West who maybe have an earlier access to a vaccine, that to some degree doesn't make really any difference to the sort of development we need to do, to the extent that the markets we're all working in equally doesn't get access to the vaccine as well. So I think that's going to be a big theme going forward. But with that, let me hand over to Pierre, head of our Francophone office and Paris office, and Pierre can talk us through some things in that market. Pierre.
Thank you very much, Paul, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'll speak now about Francophone countries, give you some general trends, and I've also handpicked a few countries to focus on them. I guess first things is, in terms of general trends, we're seeing in Francophone countries the same trends that Paul has just mentioned earlier, mainly that there are many new renewable energy projects being tendered or in preparation, and certainly less large thermal IPPs. Let's begin our review of a couple of Francophone countries by Burkina Faso, where we are very active, where Trinity has been very active in 2020. I'll give a brief overlook before jumping into transport and energy sectors. Burkina Faso is definitely facing security challenges for a couple of years now, and faced a difficult presidential election in 2020. But Mr. Kaboré, the president of Burkina Faso, managed to be re-elected in December 2020. He was formally elected in 2015. The topics in terms of project finance in Burkina Faso mostly related to transport and the energy sectors. In the transport sector, a new airport project has been awarded for construction to a consortium composed of Sogea, Satom and Carafi, and to Meridiam for operations. This was awarded in October 2020. On the energy front, there has been some movement on solar power projects. In June 2019, 155 megawatts of solar power projects were awarded to 5 sponsors, and PPP agreements and PPA agreements were signed. And we've been involved in 3 of those projects, and we hope that some of these will, and definitely those we are involved in, will reach financial close in 2020. It's probably interesting to say that this is the result of a long process that started actually in 2014, when an initial tender was awarded and later on relaunched in 2018. Hopefully, we hope that once these projects are closed, there will be new renewable power projects and maybe even a thermal power project in the capital, Ouagadougou, where there has been discussions for a long time over 120 thermal IPP, which unfortunately hasn't been able to get off the ground yet. In terms of Tunisia, Tunisia also faced a governmental crisis in 2020, but fortunately a new government was formed in September without the need of dissolving the National Assembly. This and COVID-19 certainly has slowed down a certain number of projects. But again, here we've got transport, water, and energy projects on the forefront of on the news in Tunisia. In terms of transport, there is a deep water port which is under preparation by the government to be procured as a PPP and located in Enfida. In the water sector, we've noticed that a desalination plant is under construction in Sfax. And finally, on the energy front, there's probably where there is the most activity and active deals in project finance are currently being negotiated, procured, or signed. Just a few words. We believe Tunisia is probably a country where there is a lot of potential. A law on renewable energy was passed in 2015, and based on this law, we've seen since 2016 a number of tenders for small solar and wind projects, which unfortunately encounter a certain number of issues on the PPA. But still we work with some sponsors and lenders in respect of those small projects, and we believe that solutions can be found to either debt finance or equity finance then. There has also been a tender launched in 2019 for 500 megawatts of solar concessions, which is much more bankable contracts, thankfully. And we hope that these projects will be signed and approved by the Parliament in 2020, and probably would then open the way to other tenders for solar concessions, probably in the range of 70 megawatt solar projects. And the government has certainly been repeated the message that they will be looking for new tenders in the near future. So definitely a country to watch for potential growth and new projects. Just a few words now on the remaining topics on this slide. DRC, as you may be aware, a new president was elected in 2019, and since then we've seen a lot of activity and certainly interest in DRC for new projects to move forward and a dynamic to watch in this country. And recently in 2020, 3 large independent grid projects were awarded to an international consortium. So probably a country to watch in the near future for new projects. Côte d'Ivoire, as you know, also had a lot of actuality in terms of politics with the election of Mr. Ouattara for a 3rd term as president of Côte d'Ivoire, and we hope that given this election, Côte d'Ivoire will now be able to move forward, and that a number of infrastructure and power projects which may have been on a slowed down motion will now be able to resume. And probably Ivory Coast is one of these countries where there have been a large number of thermal IPPs in the past, but the future is probably more for smaller solar and hydropower projects. Just wanted to say a few words about the World Bank and regional integration. It's interesting to see that in West Africa and certainly in the Francophone West African region, World Bank is very invested into developing the West African power pool and to try to increase the regional integration of the countries and the exchange of energies between those various countries. In 2020, we noticed that the World Bank hired consultants to help to procure large solar power projects in Mali and Burkina Faso, designed to supply and respond to the demand for energy in the region. So we believe that there is that this regional integration and the construction of new regional lines is certainly a solution for new power project and new space on the grid. Speaking of which, we're seeing that in some countries there is now a limitation as to what the grid can absorb in terms of new projects, and we're definitely seeing a trend with storage seen as a solution to respond to this constraint on the grid. I think I'm done with the Francophone countries, and I will now hand over to Paul for a few final words. Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pierre. And just to pick up on that theme in terms of lack of capacity on grid systems, I think that's certainly something that we expect to see more of both next year and generally thereafter is far more of a focus on transmission and distribution. I think it's been clear there's been a number of large IPP projects in many of the markets we're talking about here in Africa, and perhaps for at least a few years, some of the countries have got an immediate enough large generation projects. There's still lots of room in terms of connecting the dots in relation to smaller off-grid projects, the type of mini-grid, off-grid projects I was talking about earlier. But then the other key in terms of the development of the economy as a whole, but also to create more of a market for other IPPs to follow, is literally to connect the dots, is to develop that transmission and distribution network in a lot of these countries so that the cash till for the sector can be improved and just more generally the economy can be progressed. But what else are we looking forward to? Well, personally, getting on a plane again. Can't wait for that. I'm sure many of you are the same. I think a different view than my back garden would be awesome. And again, just dealing with all of you again, I think just on that, I think we'd like to thank our client group and contact group, many of you which perhaps are on this conference call, for continuing to work with Trinity and progress things in these markets. I think just back in terms of what the themes may be in respect of the business side, you know, we're going to, I think, definitely see more of a corporate aspect. So acquisitions, disposals of these entities, aggregation of them. So flipping the assets a little bit more in terms of where they're actually reasonably mature to allow a greater efficiencies in terms of the sponsors in respect of them. And yes, continued growth, as I mentioned earlier, in relation to the other sectors in the emerging market. So the transport, the healthcare, and all of those other aspects away from power as well. So we certainly look forward to seeing you in person next year. We particularly look forward to a Trinity party next year, when humans can all meet together. I think we missed out on one for the first time in a long time this year, so that was cause for much regret. It was better for our bank balance, but it was much regret that we weren't able to have a party with you this year. But we'll certainly try and make up for that in 2021. But Coach, let me hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Indeed, we do look forward to well, many parties and many events next year, not in the least the Africa Energy Forum, which is scheduled to take place in Barcelona, I think towards the end of the summer next year. We'll definitely be there. Thanks on my side to Paul and to Pierre for their inputs today. Certainly been a year that none of us will forget, but we do very much look forward to 2021. Trinity Talks will be back in 2021. There will be some talks on off-grid solar, how to de-risk your investment. That's our first talk, and then a primer on PRI, political risk insurance, coming later on in February. So just remains for me to say, on behalf of the entire Trinity team, thank you much for your attendance. Thanks very much for working with us. Very much appreciated, and have a very happy and safe rest of the festive season and New Year. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.